Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. With the growing number of parents and tax-paying citizens who are confronting their state legislators, school boards, teachers, and administrators about the indoctrination of their children with propaganda like critical race theory, social emotional learning, and gender fluidity, Americans are asking if there is a nefarious agenda unfolding to destroy America and the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. In Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23, God told the prophet that in those days, meaning the last days, it will happen that 10 men of all the different languages of the nations will take hold. They will take hold of the corner of the garment of a Jewish man, saying, "Let us go with you, for we know God is with you." Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that shines the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org and all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Our goal at PJTN is to equip you to stand against the disinformation by taking back local control of your community and your children's and grandchildren's education. The first step to that process is education. We must become informed. Remember to visit our website daily to receive updates on all of PJTN's groundbreaking initiatives and programs, and sign up to receive PJTN's media and action alerts to share with family and friends. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms at PJTN. As a PJTN Watchman, your action could mean all the difference in the success of our global mission to combat the enemy that is trying to rob our children of their future. So please help me spread this vital information today. In the Bible, we are commanded to teach our children the Word of God as stated in Joel chapter 1, verse 3. Tell your children about it, let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. That's 3 generations who must be taught about God's covenant with Israel and their exodus from Egypt. Unfortunately, we have failed miserably, and we are witnessing the evidence of that in our classrooms today. So what can we do to take back local control of our communities? What are some actions that must be taken to reverse the course we are currently on? We are witnessing parents and citizens nationwide who are mobilizing against the propaganda and the history revisionism being peddled to our children. And now we are even witnessing anti-Semitism and Holocaust revisionism in their curriculum. Organizations and institutions that were once considered respected and trusted have bought into the anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian narrative and can no longer be trusted. More and more teaching organizations like the National Education Association, as well as teachers' unions and the National School Board Association, have bought into this propaganda and are actively pushing this effort that will ultimately destroy our republic unless we engage. On a previous podcast, we discussed the National School Board Association's letter to the Biden administration requesting they designate parents and citizens who attend school board meetings to hold their local school board members accountable as domestic terrorists. In response, Attorney General Merrick Garland essentially issued a declaration of war in a memo to weaponize the FBI, including the criminal division of U.S. attorneys in 14,000 school districts across the U.S., addressing threats against school administrators, board members, teachers, and staff, stating that the department will announce a series of measures designed to address the rise of supposed criminal conduct directed towards school personnel. Who is the target of the investigation? Parents and grandparents, moms and dads. It's not Antifa who murdered people in the streets of our cities and destroyed public and private property, nor is it the racist and anti-Semitic Black Lives Matter who launched a modern-day pogrom in Los Angeles. No, it's law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. Have law-abiding citizens become the target of our Attorney General? Last month, American citizens showed up en masse on Election Day to send a message to the Biden administration, the Attorney General, and their collaborators across the U.S. that parents and tax-paying citizens have drawn a line in the sand, refusing the Marxist takeover of our children's education, our communities, and our nation. It was a nationwide referendum that reverberated from Virginia to Washington state and many points in between. Americans rejected the indoctrination of our children with racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Judeo-Christian critical race theory propaganda in our classrooms and sent a message to Biden and A.G. Garland that we will not be intimidated into silence. On this week's podcast, I have invited businessman, entrepreneur, and my spiritual mentor, Marc Goldman, who, in my research, was responsible for the milk mustache ad campaigns we saw back in the 90s. He is also an advisory board member to one of my favorite websites that is based in Jerusalem, Aish HaTorah. You can learn more about Aish HaTorah at aish.com. That's AISH.com. Marc, welcome to Proclaiming Justice.
Everything you said was exactly on point. The education being, of course, one obvious one, but it's so deep, and it's been, it's just becoming more apparent, and hopefully enough people are waking up to the danger of it. Because, one way I look at it is that the Democrats have been just crossing off commandments as fast as they can.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying there's no God, there's no right and wrong, there's no absolute truth. You can decide to be a boy or a girl or whatever you want and change your mind. And all those things are saying there's nothing true and there's nothing real, and everyone can have their own truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can appreciate what the world was like when there was any God that you wanted to pick and make up whatever you wanted him to say,
Mm-hmm.
compared to the reason America became America, the leading power of the world, because we had the biggest population, not that because we had only resources that others didn't. We were blessed, but others were as well. But because we were founded on the fundamental basis that was revolutionary at the time of one nation under God, which meant everyone agreed on what was right and what was wrong, and the country operated on that basis. And that's how we became amazing. And what the other side is doing is saying there is no right and wrong, and they're crossing them off. Think about it. Exactly what you just described about the education. They're crossing off honor your father and mother. They're saying you as a parent have no right. The children don't have to listen to you. Listen to the state.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like what happened in Germany when the Nazis turned their own children um, against their parents and were even turning them in. They had convinced them, indoctrinated them, and convinced them that their parents were the enemy.
Exactly, and the Soviets did the same.
Mm-hmm.
Communists in Russia when they did it there. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean that's exactly when there's no God and there's no right and wrong, then everything goes. Because I mean, well, we could go further, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's cases going on now in the Supreme Court, and our government is saying that you should have the right to murder a baby even when it's ready to come out.
Right. Right.
And so they crossed off that commandment.
Mm-hmm.
People of good conscience can debate, is it at conception or is it week 5 or 7?
Mm-hmm.
And but at a certain point there is no further debate, and then
Right.
you're saying murder is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if murder is okay at age day 1, then sooner or later it's going to be okay at whatever age the government decides it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned in your recent article, why are the Democrats crossing off commandments? You accurately stated in that opening statement that the Ten Commandments are the underlying foundation of Western civilization. Can you share with our audience some examples in the Torah of the evidence of that historic truth and how the Ten Commandments impacted our founding? Because honestly, going back even to the Pilgrims coming over, William Bradford, even from the founding, even from the early days of our nation, when we were still just a fledgling country and people were just coming over, it was because people wanted religious freedom. They wanted to worship God as they saw fit, not the way the king wanted them to worship God. But tell us about that.
All too often, I would say the king wanted him to worship the king.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets very confusing, because then right and wrong changes by the king's feelings of the moment,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
what it means under government.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think we can even relate it, something that every one of us could relate to. I mean, there are endless examples in the Torah, but I mean, just imagine a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl, and they're by themselves, and the girl has some toy, some candy that the boy desperately, desperately wants, and the girl's not giving it up. How kind and nice and polite is he going to be with her in order to get it if she's not giving it up at all?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say it's reasonable to say that if she ended up with only one black eye and one broken finger, she'd be lucky.
I
And
think you're right on.
I think that's. But my point is, that's me. That's every 5-year-old boy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Only, only by, and so that's our nature. We're
Yes.
not born in that, in the way we would like to pretend. So only by being taught, and only by, and sometimes harshly and sometimes explaining that that's not the appropriate behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But and so all of those, and I mean, it starts in the Torah with the Ten Commandments about not to steal and not to lie and honor your mother and father, and to,
Mm-hmm.
and not to murder and not to covet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
and think about it, the Democrats are pushing everything, covet everything that anyone else that has anything has. They don't deserve it. They should be able to take it away from them and distribute it or keep it or whatever they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, um,
Yeah.
and the unfortunate fact is that the media and virtually all of the left is doing nothing but bearing false witness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing some of the parallels that you drew in that article. One of the other ones, too, is the fourth commandment to keep the Sabbath holy and how it applies to ensuring a civilized society. That's another commandment.
I think that it's interesting because when you think about it, the Torah was given at Mount Sinai around 3,300 years ago. And I would say 99.9% of the world, of the population, was serfs or slaves or whatever designation. There was no such thing as a free enterprise system or any of the things that we take for granted today.
Right.
And so I think it's fair to ask this question. In such an environment, who else but God would insist that we take a day off?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when you really look at it, people don't come up with that on our own.
Mm-hmm.
We needed all of that in order to have some basic rules of behavior,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because otherwise we would not do it. I mean, we would just take the candy away from as long as we could.
And that's exactly what we're seeing happening. You know, we are witnessing a clash between the parents and educators in classrooms throughout the U.S. denying parental rights to their children's education. How are the Democrats' policies hindering our civilization and violating the fifth commandment to honor thy father and mother?
I think it's even doing it worse than that aspect of it, because they're also saying that in order to be racially proper, they should pass everyone regardless of how well they do, because it's not fair if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, one of the main outcomes that you get from that, the more ignorant people that you do who don't have even basic skills, the easier it is to control them, which
Mm-hmm.
seems to clearly be what the objective is.
Yeah, most definitely. You know, one of the clear distinctions that I see between Republicans and Democrats has always been the issue of abortion. And you also addressed that in the article that you drafted. With the recent Supreme Court decision to uphold Texas's right to deny abortions after 6 weeks gestation, Republicans cite the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder. However, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marc, but the Democrats have never denied when, or never defined when life begins. Instead, their argument constantly centers around a woman's right to choose. Does the Torah define when life begins to address this argument?
I mean, first of all, I'm not a rabbi, and not that I would do it, or be in a position to know. But clearly, it's a human being at one point. So in any event, that's just the fact, and it's formed. I mean, there's no question. And I would say that when you look at something else which Democrats are always pushing, which is health care for all.
Right.
If you look at all of the countries that have that, what happens is if you're over a certain age, or if your operation or treatment is going to be too expensive or too time consuming, they're going to say, go to the back of the line and die, and we'll get to you if you live long enough. Because that's another thing, because when there's no God, life doesn't mean anything either.
Yeah, years ago when I used to be involved with the pro-life movement lobbying on behalf of the unborn, I remember getting into these discussions with the opposing viewpoint and trying to convince them otherwise was virtually impossible. It was like there was a mental block and they couldn't listen to reason, and they didn't want to listen to reason. They had their opinions made up, and and this was in Tennessee, when you've got Republicans and Democrats who are Bible believing Christians, so to speak. And unfortunately, we were saying back then, if we don't value life at its inception, how can you expect civilization to value life at the end of the spectrum of our lives?
Because when you think about it, child sacrifice was normal. Murder of somebody in someone else's way was not. I mean, the whole mentality before the Torah was given and before the fundamental changing that set of rules brought was a whole different level, and enables civilization, because without those basic rules, if you can't trust anybody, and everything, is just who's stronger. Then
Hmm.
we're in the jungle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what the other side, when you look at how every communist country treats all of the rest of their citizens, I mean, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to argue with anything. You have to just,
Hmm.
and what you said a moment ago about not listening to reason. There was this quote going around that was attributed to Thomas Paine, one of the founders of America. And the quote was, trying to talk reason with someone who has given up logic is like administering medicine to a dead person.
Oh, that's good.
I know, I thought so too. I thought I'd share it with you.
It's so true. It's so
I
true.
know. I mean, and it's so frustrating because you think you're talking to a person and you're looking at them and they have two eyes and two ears and a nose and a mouth but somehow you just can't, the logic won't be heard.
There's an interesting verse in the Tanakh where it states that God turned them over. These were the Israelites back in ancient days. He turned them over to a strong delusion because they refused to love truth. And that is so evident today. There are so many people, just as you said, that do not want to hear the truth. It's like if you bring them the facts, they get angry at you. They tell you, don't send me anything anymore. And then I've asked numerous people who get offended and I get a phone call because I'm sending them information to inform them because I know where they stand on the issues and I try to inform them.
It's just about the truth. It's not about your opinion or my opinion. The
Yep.
facts are the facts. And when somebody is unwilling to hear the facts, then I hear you. And where do you go? And that's
Yeah, you can't reason. You can't reason with them.
no.
But
They just
you all,
don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up.
it's true. It's true. I don't want to know truth. Don't give it to me. Because then I'm going to be forced to have to deal with what I know now. And I don't want to know.
And that's why they're always attacking. That's
Yep.
why they're always calling us whatever, racist or supremacist or whatever they want to, in order to put us on the defense, because otherwise the truth is it's too strong, and they just don't want to hear it. And
Yeah.
they justify that kind of crazy behavior by calling us names, and I don't know if they believe it or not, but
Yeah.
it's troubling. It's very, very troubling to see this going on in America, but it's not new, unfortunately. I mean, this has been moving slowly, and now it's just that the temperature has been turned up,
Hmm.
and it's becoming more obvious. And hopefully, as you said, more people are becoming sufficiently aware that we have to stand up and not let this go on, because that's no more America. And what's the world like without America?
That's right. That's right. We being a beacon of light, Israel and the United States. We're unique. We're both unique countries. It's our Judeo-Christian values in America and the Jewish values in Israel that uphold the Torah, uphold the scriptures. And that's why it's so important that we remember our heritage, that we remember our founding, because our founding fathers did. They were, it was the Hebrew Bible that played a major role in the drafting of our Constitution.
I
Um,
couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And they were real Torah scholars. And, this is God given rules. So,
yeah.
I mean, when you realize that's the source, then, and you look at what has been built from it,
Mm-hmm.
America being one example, and Israel in the short time that's it's also amazing.
Yep.
But you start with those fundamental principles, and people have the opportunity, and people can trust each other, and all the basic things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are the people of the book.
Yeah.
We are the people of the book. One thing before we move on, because I want to talk about the eighth commandment, one thing I find interesting is the battle that we are seeing waged is not just in America now. It seems to be all the daughter governments or nations of Great Britain. And if you think about it, you look at what's happening in New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, the United States, Canada, even Great Britain. Look at how similar our struggles are. The issues that we're addressing and fighting, it's very similar. And I just think it's odd, because look at India; they don't seem to have a problem. Um, all these other countries don't seem to be as affected or denying the rights of the citizens to, live their lives as they see fit, or at least, what used to be way the way that the values that used to conduct their government over the people or not over the people. It's just very disturbing to see how all of these countries that came out of Great Britain, all these daughter countries, are now dealing with this issue of suppressing people's freedom.
I couldn't agree more that that's happening. And it seems to me that the communist countries, which, among other things, of course, say that there's no God, are the ones behind this because they have an agenda to take over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
been active and aggressive and trying to get their people in all the places that they can to influence. And when you look at media, when you look at so much of what's said and so much of what's cool, we see that they're pushing it in that direction.
Yeah. Well, let's take the eighth commandment. It states, "Thou shalt not steal." Over the last 2 years, we have witnessed mass destruction of federal buildings and public and private property by these barbaric individuals with no repercussions by government officials, whether local or federal. And many of these cities, like Los Angeles, are governed by Democrats. What can citizens do, Marc, to combat this growing threat in our communities? How do you take on the establishment when it's Democrat leadership that these people are having to confront, like California?
Right. The fact that California passed a law saying that you could go shoplifting up to $950 with little repercussions. And again, it starts at 950. Where how high does it go?
Mm-hmm.
And then if stealing up to any amount is okay, who is safe? Who can even feel okay to wear a watch or anything? And so, I mean, it just crossing off the commandment to even put that kind of a thinking out there. I mean, again, how does anybody feel safe if stealing is okay?
Right. And if laws aren't being enforced, which isn't
And they're
happening.
purposely, so the answer is stop electing the people that are doing that. I mean, that's the real question. You have to ask, I mean, are there so many who are saying, don't bother me with the facts, my mind is made up, regardless of what's happening right in front of their face?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, I mean, how do you get through to those people? That's the challenge. And how do we message in an effective way so that the facts become clear and obvious, and there's no making up your own truth. There's one God, and there's right and wrong, and you can't do this other stuff.
That's exactly right. And of course, that's one of our strategic campaigns is educating Christians, Jews, all people of conscience to take a stand on the local level in their communities because they have skin in the game. They can affect the outcome, the future of their community and the future of their state by voting, by knowing who to vote for. And of course, we are heading into an election year. It's going to be one of the most important elections of our lifetime, and people have got to be informed. They have to know who's running, who is going to uphold their constitutional freedoms, who's going to uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. because we're not going to get it, we're not going to hear it from the media. We're going to have to educate ourselves on the local level. How, if even if it takes door knocking, going door to door, doing it the old-fashioned way, and getting to meet your neighbors, getting to talk to them about what's going on and how to make the changes in our local communities, especially the school board.
Right about the education that's necessary. And to take it even a step further, I think that appreciating those freedoms that we have that are listed in the Constitution, when it's one nation under God and everything else, because when we take those things for granted, that's how you can lose them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So recognizing what the world would be like if you didn't have that. I mean, I may have shared with you the story of someone went to visit their daughter in China who's a teacher there. And this was during the Hong Kong riots. And she said, when anything would come on any news station, BBC or CNN, whatever, that would mention the riots, screens would go black.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So
Wow.
when you have that level of control and the people can't be informed of what's going on and everything else, I mean,
Well, that leads, yeah.
the simple example, I think, of a country run by Democrats or Republicans, and this is one example where you have the same genealogy, you have the same climate, you have the same resources, but
Mm-hmm.
you've got North Korea run by Democrats and South
Mm-hmm.
Korea run by Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So where do you want to live?
Yeah.
I mean,
That's an easy answer, at least for
but
me.
that's really, I mean, I don't see
That's
how
a great
anyone would.
analogy. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's all too accurate, and I don't see how anyone, if they had the choice, would pick North Korea.
No, no,
And yet,
absolutely.
if you keep voting for Democrat, then you're picking North Korea because that's where they want to bring you.
It's the good point. One of the perpetrators of the disinformation today is the mainstream media, as you alluded to earlier. And the ninth commandment informs us that thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Yet we constantly see lies and propaganda peddled.
If you can't trust what somebody tells you in that basic sense, then civilization again
Mm-hmm.
becomes much more difficult to even have. There needs to be that. That's why a nation of laws and all the other things. I mean, the Torah lays out, you have judges, you got to have fair decisions, no bribery,
Mm-hmm.
everything. I mean, all those things. But if they're saying they're in charge and they make up the rules as they see fit, which
Mm-hmm.
is what they seem to be doing, we're trying to do. If we keep electing Democrats, we're going to get more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. You know, it's impossible to make informed decisions when we can't rely on an open and honest media in our country. It's critical to our survival. In fact, I was listening to a doctor who is from Belgium, and he was talking about this mass formation that's going on globally, how people are being propagandized and almost like what is the word that I'm looking for? They're not hallucinating. It's not hallucinating. It's they're being brainwashed. And and he's talking about how it's the same strategy used in Europe when the Nazis came to power, and were implementing a similar thing because the public is being fed with one narrative only.
I
And when
mean,
you
well, let's bring it even more current. Okay, you and I cannot fathom the thinking of people who flew airplanes filled with people,
Yep.
into buildings filled with people, having been taught and then believing they were doing the right thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
So exactly what you're saying, and we've just seen, most of us have seen right in front of our eyes that took place, and they did that. And you see mothers whose children have blown themselves up to
Mhm.
kill Israelis, say, I wish I had more to send.
Yeah, and then they celebrate. They hand out candy after it's done. You know, we look at we look at the education here in the United States, and one of the things that we've been battling for many years is the propaganda in textbooks in the Palestinian controlled areas. And I used to tell people, if you want to see the impact of indoctrination on children, look at what parents are doing and the society is doing to children in the Palestinian controlled areas, and look at how they're convincing them to become these little martyrs to kill Jews.
If
And
you
that,
look at Palestinian Media Watch, they show what they show on kids TV and stuff like that. They celebrate murder.
mm-hmm,
When you celebrate murder, you're going to get more of it.
yeah.
Right? You're encouraging that behavior.
Yeah, I was just reading recently, maybe a week or two ago, there was a 14-year-old Palestinian girl who attacked and stabbed to death a 26-year-old mother who was out walking in a stroller, her baby. And the 14-year-old girl went up to her and stabbed her to death. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, where is the outrage about this? It's the story is covered on through Jewish publications in Israel, but is there any story about this? Are we not using this as an analogy? We have to use it as an analogy for us. This is what happens when you indoctrinate your children. I don't know where this 14-year-old girl went to school. I don't know her parents, but I can bet you that for anybody 14 years of age to have the the chutzpah to go up and take the life of another human being, that child had to have been indoctrinated by her family, by her school, by society.
You and I cannot comprehend that the willingness to teach that, but that again goes, if you're going to ignore the Ten Commandments, then civilization doesn't make any difference. Then it just goes by, you can do anything. And
Yeah.
if that's the case, then civilization does not last very long.
No. No, but that leads us into our final commandment, thou shalt not covet. Number 10, with the white privilege mantra being peddled in our children's classrooms and in our society, and we are intentionally inciting hatred against our neighbor. You know, we're fostering resentment and jealousy and envy in our country, especially with our children, and even in the Palestinian. I mean, we're just talking about the same thing. It's the covetousness.
Exactly. And it's actually, even that takes it worse, because rather than encourage people to work harder, if what they want to do is become better at whatever it is, it says, no, that person that worked so hard doesn't deserve what they have. We should be able to take it away from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's like saying, oh, yeah, everybody can be a professional baseball player.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, they practice all day long. You know, you may have some skills, but you got to practice all day, whatever it is you're doing, hitting, pitching, catching, running,
Mm-hmm.
every sport, doesn't matter, or any field. People in financial, people in science, you name the field, and the harder you work, the better you get, and the luckier you get, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
But when
Absolutely.
coveting is the thing, and they don't deserve it, no matter how hard they worked, then and then what you do when you do that is take away everyone's incentive to work hard,
Yeah.
which is what you see in every communist place. And then everyone has nothing.
Yeah. I had a frightening conversation with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago who is a doctor, and she's a radiologist. Her husband is a general surgeon, and she's in her 60s, and she was telling me, she said, I would not go to, and I would not have a doctor that is 40 or under. And she said, because those of us who are older, who went through medical school, who did it the old fashioned way, um, these are quota doctors. And these universities, these medical universities, had to have a certain quota of doctors that represented a certain segment of society. And she said that they're not trained. And she said, we work with them side by side in our different fields, and we see the evidence of the lack of education. These doctors, these new doctors, are not ready for the healthcare world.
And if they're willing to go that far with even doctors, think about what we were talking about a little before, where they don't even want to teach kids to read and write.
Yep.
And so you can just, control people when they're, the more ignorant you make them, the easier it is to control them. And that's part of the agenda.
Yeah.
But we should figure out how to make some kind of rule where the people who think that everybody should get passed, when they need an operation, they have to only use those doctors.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, no, it's ridiculous. Competence has to be the fundamental,
That's
no
right.
matter what it is. I mean, you want the walls to stand, you want to be able, the car to drive, you want everything to be right and do what it's supposed to.
Yeah, we're too busy meeting quotas anymore. It's such a shame. As we are going to close our segment today, you've given us some incredible perspectives to ponder, and I want to thank you for taking time. But I wanted to ask you, in our opening verse in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23, it's one of my favorites to often quote to not only my Christian brethren, but my Jewish brethren as well. Whenever I speak to a Jewish audience, I always remind them that God told the prophet that in the latter days, 10 men from the nations will come hold the seat or the fringe of the garment of a Jew and say, we want to go with you because we know that God is with you. I'm intrigued to know, because you're involved with Aish, and it's one of my favorite websites, resources that I go to frequently to understand the Hebrew roots of Christianity. And what do you see this trend at Aish as an advisory board member, where more Christians, because I get inundated with Christians who want to know more, they want to study more, they're intrigued by this. Are you seeing that as well?
I think that what we're seeing is when people are recognizing what, it's not, I don't know if I would say it's about Jews, but we're the messengers.
You have the Torah. That's right.
But our job is to share it with everyone, because those are rules for living, and if we all follow them, then peace goes everywhere. And when you don't covet, then people can work as hard as they want and do as well as they can. When you don't steal, and when you don't lie, and when you do all the basic things, and of course not to murder.
Right.
So by just recognizing there's one God and there's an absolute right and wrong, and there's no conversation, there's no discussion about, oh, you can steal a little or this or that. There is none. It's clear, hard and fast, because one nation under God, it's clear. One
Right.
nation under government, every day the rules change.
Right. Yeah, and we're seeing that for sure.
Yeah, and then you'll never know if you're doing the right thing or not, because they can get you whenever they want to.
Right. Right. Well, Mark,
So
is there?
I hope no, you're doing a great job of getting out there to wake people up and realize what's being taken away, what they're trying to take away. And so by spreading it out there, I think that's what makes the whole difference, and that's what we all have to do.
Amen. Well, thank you for being that light, and Mark, thank you so much for sharing your thoughtful and informative perspective about the threat people of faith are facing, and we must confront. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the biblical facts of what is at stake. We will post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share this with your family and friends, especially with the holidays coming up. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to warn our family, friends, and neighbors about this existential threat to our communities. If we do not stand up to this Marxist anti-God movement, How will God judge us for standing by as the world, even Christian and Jewish faith leaders, accept the disinformation and indoctrination of our children in our local classrooms against these historic biblical truths? We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman, that if the watchman sees the enemy advancing, it is the responsibility of the watchman to warn the inhabitants of that city. And if they fail to warn the inhabitants and any innocent blood is shed, it's going to be required of that watchman. And as a watchman, you can sound the alarm and warn others by simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends. You know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this effort and more programs like this for just $20 a month. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN is on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. I want to leave you with the word of encouragement found in Psalm 144, verse 1. Blessed be the Lord, who trains my hands for battle and my fingers for war. God bless you and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the state of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.